Hello, fasten your seatbelts. It's the world this week, the last 7 days of global events chewed over by four of the finest editorial minds. Let me introduce them to you with no delay. Vivian Walt at Time Magazine, great to see you. On the other side of our studio, Craig Kapitas, room for a rowdy time. Craig, of course, of the Daily Beast. Good to see you, Craig. Borzu Daragahi joins us, international correspondent of The Independent. Hello to you, Borzu. And Vladislav Davidson, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, author of the book From Odessa with Love. Vladislav, great to see you, sir. Welcome, all of you, to the programme. We start with Belgorod, Russia, near the border with Ukraine. It's been in the news all week, of course, because of an incursion by two groups of fighters who describe themselves as Russian, anti-Putin, with the aim of liberating Russia. France 24's Marc Perelman asked Ilya Ponomarev, a Russian dissident in exile and political representative of the Freedom of Russia Legion, if they got a green light to carry out the incursion from Ukraine.
Green light, obviously, yes, because both troops, they are part of Ukrainian military. They are part of international legion, which is in turn is part of Ukrainian military structure, armed forces. But one thing is the green light, another thing is organizing, assistance, and steering the operation. None of this has happened. Not a single Ukrainian soldier has entered Russian soil. It's a totally autonomous operation by Russians inside Russia. And that's why they are not bound by any obligations that Ukraine is taking in front of international community. We came to liberate our land.
Ponomarev there speaking to Marc Perelman a little earlier this week. Vivian Walt, this situation here, an incursion like this, few would have foreseen this happening, I think.
No, I don't think so. Although, obviously, there have been rumblings of cracks within the Russian forces itself, between the Wagner Group, obviously, and the Kremlin. But I guess one should have foreseen it, as this happens in every major war. You would find a kind of resistance force emerging after a certain time, and we're now well into the second year. It remains to be seen how much damage they can really do. They're a small force, and they're up against a massive military, and a power that's prepared to kind of feed into the cannon as much fodder as it wants. So it's brave, and it's hard to know really how much impact it will have on the Kremlin.
Thank you. Craig, your thoughts?
Well, war is usually God's way of teaching Americans geography, but I think in this instance it's not really happening. We still have a lot of complainers in the United States, elected officials now, who want to pull back from Ukraine, which is really silly. But as Vivian said, we're in our second year, and, war is cruelty, and there's no use in trying to reform it. And the fact is, the crueler it is, the quicker it's going to be over, and Putin and his criminal gangs will be gone. And that's just a reality. You can dance around it all you want, but there is reality and there's delusion.
Craig, thank you. Borzu Daragahi, I hope you can hear me, sir. Give us your thoughts on this situation, because, as we've said, very few people would have predicted this happening. Do you sense that these groups can come back and have more impact? Do you feel this is a one-off event?
I don't think it's a one-off event, and I think that there's been a whole bunch of things that have happened in the Russian homeland as a result of the Ukraine invasion. As the speaker before me said, war is ugly, and this idea, this notion that Americans have been famous for, that you can launch a overseas war of imperial conquest and pay little cost for it, it's a fantasy, and apparently Putin bought into that fantasy, took exactly the wrong lessons from the U.S. wars overseas, thinking that he could get some quick glory, forgetting that war in this age is very ugly and very expensive, and there will be blowback.
Borzu, thank you. Let's bring in Vladislav Davidson. Vladislav, I remember when I first met you here in the studio, you explained to me about your heritage, your pride to be associated with Ukraine. Give us your thoughts, sir, because I'm waiting to hear what you think.
Great. Thank you so much for having me back. First of all, as it happens, my mother, who is a Russian, and I'm from a mixed Russian-Ukrainian family, has her college best friend living in Belgorod. And my mother calls me an hour ago and says, Vlad, my college best friend read on your Facebook that you identify as a Judeo-Banderite. And she told me she's afraid of you coming to kill her son as a Judeo-Banderite neo-Nazi imperialist into Belgorod. I said to her, she should be afraid, yeah. As it happens, that's what happened. The Ukrainians have unleashed their proxy Russian defector forces into the Russian border. This has created tremendous internal problems for the Russian government, and it's created a morale boost for the Ukrainians. It has shown the Russian population that Putin is not controlling a 1,300-kilometer border with Ukraine and also Belarus, which is part of the Union state with Russia. And now the Russians will have to redistribute some of their National Guardsmen and some of their troops to control those border areas in order to make the population less afraid that I will be coming from New York City in order to be a neo-Nazi and do something to their kids.
Indeed. I don't think anybody suspects that you're going to do that, sir. You're a peace-loving man, as we know. But I think what you're saying is that there's a heck of a lot of propaganda being spread, which is giving the wrong kind of images.
Yes, I am saying that. Yes, sir.
Indeed,
Yes,
definitely. I thought I'd better clarify that just in case anybody wasn't quite getting the nuance of what you were
Mark,
saying.
you got to remember, as I mentioned to Vlad earlier today, the only way to smite the Philistines is with the jawbone of an ass.
Right, he did say that, yes, and I replied, so often I try.
Yeah, well, and you're doing a very good job of it this evening, I might say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Hello to my mother's friends in Belgorod. I'm not coming over, don't worry, but you should think about what you're doing in your life.
No, but I think that Vlad makes a really good point, which is how, even if this is a small incursion, the fact is that it kind of cracks this aura of invincibility around Putin, and that of itself is tremendously valuable. It's I think for more than a year we've had the sense from outside that Putin is just so omnipotent and has everything totally under control. And these little incidents, and it does seem somewhat little compared to the whole scope of the war, basically puts cracks after crack in that, and that of itself could have something of a kind of ripple effect.
Craig?
Well, I always go back to the historical fact that there's never been a successful revolution in Russia without the army signing on to it. And the good news is that Putin better surrender real soon, or he's not going to have an army left, because the Ukrainians are really beating the tar out of them. And at the same time, there's still a lot of worrisome things. One of the things that worries me is that Russia has now been using, old World War II type ordnance, kind of bombs you can't take out with electronic warfare, because he doesn't care who he blows up. So the subversion, the sabotage, the agitation, the disinformation, the assassinations that Putin's are known for.
Moving the tactical nukes to Belarus.
I've never bought into the nuke scenario, because if Putin uses a tactical nuke, his country is gone.
It's theater, though.
Yeah. See, the thing is, if you watch Russian TV, which is an interesting experiment to do, they're selling this idea that we, the West, want to go in and take Russia. No, we don't want Russia. We don't want it at all. In fact, we don't even think a lot of Russians want it anymore. Just get rid of this criminal regime, and get rid of your security apparatus and all your nonsense, and come back and join the community of nations. This is what this is all about. And Putin is just scared to death of this, and he's convinced the Russian people that they need to be scared to death of this. And he has a wonderful propaganda machine that continues to tub thump this to everyone there. So to your point, Vivian, I don't see this war ending anytime soon.
No.
Bozu Daragahi, can I bring you in to give us some kind of another nuance on this one? Because clearly there is a sense, as Vivian has pointed out, that this is really cracked this idea that Putin is invincible. Craig saying that actually Ukraine's troops had already done that by beating the Russians back on every possible opportunity. Bakhmut, I know, possibly has fallen. But the situation perhaps is showing a different kind of reality now. We'll join you, Borso, in a moment. Let's bring in Vladislav, who's waiting for us, I hope, and can hear us clearly. Do you have something to add to what we've just heard here in the studio about the idea that Putin's armor is perhaps irrevocably dented now?
Look, I don't think it's irrevocably dented, but it is just as in Bakhmut, it is a war of attrition. He's losing legitimacy. There is no ideological big vision, big idea of what the Russian state is now. It's a nostalgic brew of communism and Russian imperialism and the great things in terms of aesthetics and patrimony from the time of a Russian empire, but they don't have a big vision. What has held the regime together, and as a regime, is an idea of legitimacy by success. Once you stop having success, you no longer have legitimacy. So when you start wars like this and you put your legitimacy on the line, you are losing the buy-in from the Russian population on keeping quiet politically in exchange for ever-growing, economic pie and cities, the big cities in Moscow and Leningrad, St. Petersburg being clean and nice and full of hip restaurants, right? Once you start losing, you lose the input of the population. Legitimacy is very difficult to taste, to smell, but it's a real thing,
Vladislav Davidson, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the situation in Turkey. Turkey, of course, going to the polls on Sunday for the second round of its presidential election. President incumbent Erdogan overturning the form book in the first round. But the challenger, Kılıçdaroğlu, is not giving up hope.
Our project is ready to send all refugees back to their home countries without any racism. We, the coalition leaders, made a decision. We'll send them all back to their home countries within a maximum of 2 years.
There we go. So leaning towards a more right-wing agenda. Borzu Dargahi, kind of bring you in to start us off on this one regarding Turkey. What do you see the situation like there? What is your reading of what will happen?
Well, I mean, it looks like Erdogan is poised for victory based on his performance in the first round. He almost scored a first-round victory. And the opposition ahead of the second round made a kind of 180-degree turn, going from a message of peace and love, the famous heart-shaped thing, the heart-shaped hand figure that the opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu became a sort of angry snarl directed at the refugees that are here. I think it's interesting to note and important to note that sending refugees back to their home countries against their will is not only a violation of international treaties to which Turkey is a signatory, but also a violation of Turkish law. So I think that, there's politicians say whatever they need to say to get elected and then do whatever they want once they're in office. I think the danger here is that unleashing such toxic messaging into a society could have unintended consequences. There are several million Syrians living here. There are other refugees that are living here. Many have been here for many years. They have children going to the schools here and so on. So it's that kind of ugliness tends not to help in the democratic development of any country.
And Borzu, this idea that Kılıçdaroğlu was coming out with about sending the migrants back without racism, just using those words, it just seems like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, he says without racism, but meanwhile, he has put up signs all over the country that say that Syrians will leave. And, big, huge banners and big red letters saying that. It didn't say migrants or refugees or, even foreigners, which is pretty nasty in itself, but it specifically identified Syrians. So I don't know what you would call that.
Borzu, thank you. Vladislav, I hope you can still hear us. Vladislav Davidson of the Atlantic Council, author of the book From Odessa with Love. Turkey, of course, has played tried to play a big role in mediating in some way the war in Ukraine. Do you see this election having an effect on that?
Well, the nationalism and even jingoism of wanting to send millions of Syrian refugees aside, this is something that the Erdogan government has also saber-rattled the Europeans for concessions and economic concessions before they come to the Europeans and they say, well, we're going to unleash 5-6 million refugees on you if you don't sign X. The Europeans quietly sign X. It's happened several times before. That aside, which is quite nasty and unpleasant, that aside, the Turks do play a very constructive role as the only major NATO player with a self-sufficient army and a NATO navy who can have discussions with both the Ukrainians, the Americans, and the Russians on equal footing. They've not cut ties. They are a more or less honest interlocutor. They've positioned themselves as being useful as a more or less honest interlocutor. They have been at the forefront of negotiations on the grain deal and the Black Sea Accord in my family's Odessa. This is where my wife's from. It's where my family is. The Turks were basically, with the UN, the interlocutors for that. They set up the grain deal that was negotiated in Turkey. The Turks are very important for back channel negotiations. All sorts of stuff happens in Turkey whenever a Russian and a Ukrainian oligarch or an American back channel negotiator and a Russian back channel negotiator need to meet. That will happen either Istanbul or Ankara, very quietly, sometimes not very quietly. So they have a role to play, and I don't think the outcome of this election either way will change any of that, because we have an alternative partner for someone who is trusted by both sides and can talk to both sides and has economic relations with both sides and is a member of NATO.
Vladislav, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to the studio with Craig and Vivian. The change by Kılıçdaroğlu seems to, maybe I'm reading this the wrong way, but it gives the electorate a choice of basically the same person but a different name. Is that fair?
I mean, there's something very distressing about what's happened in the last 2 weeks since the first round of the election, where perhaps naively we in the so-called West looked at this election as being the big turning point where, Turkey was once again going to kind of rediscover liberal democracy or something. That's clearly not the case. And indeed, what's happened is that people have kind of doubled down. You have a leader that's increasingly authoritarian, another 5 years as president, I think we can safely say is going to be a steady kind of drift towards more and more sort of authoritarianism. And you have the opposition feeling like their only chance is to be more authoritarian than the next guy. And a little bit, I think that, when you look at the map, the geographic map, and I think this is the mistake we make from the outside, is we tend to focus on the cities, and we tend to read and listen to what's coming out of the cities. And if you look at the map and where the support is for Erdogan and the opposition, it's two different countries. And we forget about that other country. And that actually is the huge heartland that comprises Turkey. That's kind of the real Turkey, if you like.
And that's very much that Erdogan kind of leaning.
And that is Erdogan territory, and people feel loyal and they feel grateful. You listen to the voices coming out of that. It's as if they feel a gratitude that they've kind of got this leader that's making kind of grand Turkey again.
Indeed. We've had an earthquake. There's runaway inflation. There's all manner of problems, but Erdogan appears to be Teflon.
And why is that, Mark?
You tell me so.
Erdogan is a dictator. Dictators do not lose elections. All dictatorships are founded on the fear of the many and the cleverness of the few. And Erdogan's very clever. And for years, he's held a trump card. It's membership in NATO. NATO's second largest standing army. They're in bed with the Russians. Erdogan's government will get in bed with anyone that's going to make them money. And as Vivian pointed out, 25% of the country lives in the countryside. These are village people, not like the ones who you heard in the disco. These are, and we do not spend enough time with them. And as for the city people, because Vivian makes a really, really good point there. You know, since 2006, Erdogan has built 269 new prisons. Now, they weren't built to house someone robbing a bank or stealing a car. These were built to house his boogeymen. This mysterious, non-existent terrorist organization called FETÖ, or these Kurds. Now, this is not to say that there aren't bad guys like that there, but historically, over his administration, anyone who disagrees with him, he jails them, and he labels them a friend of Fethullah Gulen, or a nasty Kurd, or an anti-Islamic bedbug. The list goes on, and he puts them in jail. So right now there's about 425 prisons in Turkey, and you know who they're filled of? They're filled with political prisoners, journalists, our colleagues. Yet we have to do business with them because they are a member of NATO. That's the predicament we are in.
Borzu Daragahi, can I get some comment on that one from you, sir? Starting with Erdogan, a dictator?
I would say that he is. That is one of the major factors that is contributing to his victory. He made all the rules. So he basically jailed his most charismatic opponent years ago, and he managed to get a conviction of the mayor of Istanbul, who was another very promising politician, in December. And then he, changed all sorts of other rules. He dominates. I was just at the gym before coming here. I was watching every single channel on the television is Erdogan talking. So he dominates the broadcast media. He's just everywhere. And, that kind of control, he shapes the battlefield. Yes, he's going to win the election, but he shapes the battlefield. Is it somewhat competitive? Yeah, it's somewhat competitive. I think a lot of Turks don't want to give up on the idea that Turkey remains somewhat of a democracy, and that they don't want to admit that many of the Republican features of Turkey have been lost already.
Borzu in Istanbul, thank you very much indeed. Full coverage, of course, of all events relating to the Turkish election over the weekend and beyond here on France 24. Maybe, if we're lucky, we'll get Borzu to comment as well. Let's move on. Ron DeSantis declaring himself as a candidate for the Republican nomination for the US presidential election of 2024. He decided to showcase his credentials in a live online forum on the social network that we call Twitter. Funnily enough, Elon Musk, billionaire who owns Twitter, was the host of the forum, which was, in fact, turned out to be a living nightmare due to technical issues. Let's have a little listen.
Are you there? Can you hear us? I think you broke.
I'm here.
I know. I think you broke the internet there. We had over 500,000 people in one Twitter space, and it was growing by like 50,000 a minute. So, congrats on breaking the internet there.
There we go. It leaves the question, should politicians stick to old school methods of campaigning and selling their political wares? Vivian.
This is kind of a story as much about the media as it is about the men, right?
Completely.
let's just admit that the entire media industry is kind of broken, and that we're about to see the worst aspects of it going into the 2024 election. I just cannot imagine. So in a way, this was a very fitting launch of a campaign to be on Twitter and to be totally full of bugs, and to have the host of that announcement be the owner of this media platform, and the chumminess. They're really. I don't know how we got to this point where there is just simply no kind of intelligent debate about the issues in the world's biggest economy.
Indeed. It's one of the reasons why we have this program, to have that interesting, intelligent debate, and I'm glad for your contribution to make this happen. Craig, Ron DeSantis, Twitter, tell us your thoughts, sir.
Well, the question I have, is he a witless bully or just a hapless punk? These are the people who run in the Republican Party now. And all this kerfuffle over what happened on Twitter, with Elon, right? Not Elmer Musk. Elon Musk.
Elon,
excuse me. It'll be
was in Bugs
forgotten
Bunny.
about tomorrow because the election is over a year away and things change very quick. And whether this DeSantis guy is going to make it or not, I think it's too soon to tell. But he's getting money. He's scooping in the money, and that's what it's about right now. It's about acquiring the funds for the run. Actually, and he raised money off of last night. So you know, as long as they spell his name right.
So we're mocking it, but he's making money out of it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, they are making money out of this. That's what it's about. It's about making money to monopolize power and profit. Trump does the same thing. You know, if you want to look at, a tale of two cities, look at the merchandising campaign of the Democratic Party against the merchandising campaign of the Republican Party. And guess which one makes more money? Guess which one is better organized?
Tell us.
Yeah, make America great again, my friend.
Indeed. Those hats. Bozo Darigai, you've been listening to what's been going on. I don't know whether you tried to tune into the DeSantis Twitter.
Of course, I'm American. No, I mean, I didn't try to Twitter. I don't care. I mean, Ron DeSantis is an uncharismatic, wooden, totally cynical, completely transparently just a witless. I don't know about punk or whatever, but he's just a terrible candidate. He's not going to win. He has zero charisma. Elon Musk is a boy billionaire, juvenile, emotionally just completely stunted. The fact that the media and the corporate world give him so much power is more a symptom of the dysfunction of the American system. And it's a complete debacle, the whole thing. Twitter aside, just the fact that this is the kind of person, these are the kind of people who become American elites is a real comment on the complete broken culture and political system of the United States.
Bozo, thank you very much indeed. Vladislav, can I bring you in to tempt you with this one? What if Trump and DeSantis managed to somehow bury the hatchet and go as a kind of double act? How do you think that would work out?
Well, I am also, it seems that everyone tonight on tonight is an American citizen. I think all of us actually have an American passport. We all have skin in the game. We all have votes. I too am an American. And I am, as you see my Vyshyvanka, my Ukrainian Vyshyvanka, Ukrainian shirt, I'm a one-issue voter for the next year and a half, 2 years. Until this is over, I have one issue. The most pro-Ukrainian candidate, whoever it is going to get my vote. As of now, it's Biden. If there's a more pro-Ukrainian candidate, I'll vote for him. I don't care about anything else at this point. I have no other issues. So DeSantis and Trump are both not my candidate, first of all. Secondly, the Republicans have a right to have a primary. I don't want to live in a one-party state. Lots of people in the prestige and legacy media do want to live in a one-party state. I don't. I think the fact that someone like Trump came to power is a huge indictment of the way that American elites ran the country for 20 years. And the fact that, as we've said before, this is being launched on Twitter is an indictment of how badly the media mismanaged itself, how badly the digital revolution's destruction of our economic model has recombobulated everything, how badly it's destroyed the entire basis of our industry's economic system, and how everything is being realigned and being run by oligarchs like Musk. Now, that aside, unpleasant as those things are, they're structural. Mr. DeSantis's own virtues is that he's young, and America is an oligarchy in many ways run by the old. It's a gerontocracy, and I say that not as a conspiracy theorist, but as someone who's born at the very end of the Soviet Union, as a perestroika baby. America's gerontocracy. Biden is very old. Donald Trump is very old. The one thing that you could say about Mr. DeSantis, and I don't like his politics and I don't like him, is the fact that he's not old. I like that.
So that's the only positive we get on that one. There we go. Craig.
Whether or not you have skin in the game is completely dependent on what state you vote in. Now, the state that I vote in, Florida, I got no skin in the game. Now, if you vote,
DeSantis is your man.
oh, yeah. That's I
probably
have
none of us do.
for us dual nationals who've been gone for 50 years or more. This is the last place you vote. So
No, that's a sad situation about, the U.S. democratic
system.
is that it's decided by a tiny number of people.
The electoral college system.
I faithfully vote every election, but it means nothing.
Where do you vote? Which state?
In California.
See, you really don't have any skin in the game either,
No,
because
of course
California will always go Democrat. And this is why this money we were talking about, they target these swing states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Minnesota. They're not going to target Florida anymore, maybe North Carolina, but that's where all the money goes. And I don't even remember the last time someone who got the popular, winning the popular vote should be who wins it, but the electoral system precludes that from happening. So
Popular vote's the most number of actual votes, isn't it? That's what you say. That's what you mean by that, yeah.
The way, and this is what the Republicans did. They gamed the system last time around. They gamed the system, gerrymandering districts. It's a whole nother world.
Vladislav wants to join in. Go ahead, sir.
I want to say, as a fellow absentee voter in New York, I feel great not voting anymore. It's great. I feel clean. I've stopped voting after the 2016 election. That was the last time I voted. I don't vote anymore. It feels absolutely great. I just want to say, and I know all sorts of people will tell me that I'm dooming democracy and that I have a responsibility in all of this. It just feels great not to vote in a system like America. That's my position.
Borzu, final word on DeSantis.
My final word?
Yeah, on DeSantis. We're coming back to you after that.
His whole obsession with woke culture, his targeting of gays and lesbians and the transgender community is horrible. It's just as awful as in Turkey we were talking about how both sides are playing this kind of nasty game of targeting vulnerable communities. Look, in general, it is wrong and borderline evil to target vulnerable minorities as a political strategies. Period.
Borzu, thank you very much indeed. So with no faith in the political system, we now move on to artificial intelligence, which might well start to influence the political system in some way, shape or form. Sam Altman of OpenAI met with Emmanuel Macron earlier today. Altman had, of course, threatened to pull out of Europe if the EU got a bit too heavy-handed with regulations. Apparently, he's backtracked on that threat now. He, of course, is the man behind ChatGPT, which some kids use to cheat on their homework and others use it for far more malicious levels, let's put it that way. Let's take a listen to Altman when he spoke to the US Congress roughly 10 days ago.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. I think that could happen in a lot of different ways. It's why we started the company. I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening, but we try to be very clear-eyed about what the downside case is and the work that we have to do to mitigate that.
Strengths, there are opportunities, there are weaknesses, there are threats. Vivian, help us
the
see
real
through this one.
problem is that he tells Congress we've got to be regulated, which is what the big tech always says, because obviously they want to come off as being cooperative because it's a tactic in which they can shape the regulations. But they get to Europe and it's a whole other order. You've just had the EU fine Meta 1 billion euros, no small thing. And it's clear that the EU is not really interested in in that kind of cooperation. This is sort of a monster that's been unleashed. Perhaps many would say too soon, too early to have really hit the market, but in a way it's taken on a life of its own, and we don't really know what the implications are. There's implications in every industry, really.
Indeed. I was reading an interview with Henry Kissinger, who talked about AI being as important or as influential as the invention of the printing press back in the 15th century.
Yeah.
Gutenberg, I'm told. I was taught at school it was Caxton, but that was obviously an English bent towards that one. Do you feel that we're being Luddites by doubting AI, or do you feel there's actually a real sense of alarm? Craig?
I don't think we have any say in the matter. Take a look at the stock market, the companies that are developing artificial intelligence. They're booming 500-600%. It's the new Apple. No one's going to regulate them. There's too much money involved, And as far as this is hitting every profession, right? These chat GPIs hitting our profession. No one writes anymore. Next generation of journalists in schools. Oh, just plug it into the chat. You don't even need to go anywhere. Keep down the travel costs. We don't need any reporters at the front line. We'll send in a drone, and you can look at the pictures and use the chat GPI. It's a brand new generation. It's going to be completely different. And frankly, I'm already considering myself a buggy whip maker. It's over. They don't need the pen anymore.
Borzu Daragahi, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if only, they call it artificial intelligence. If only it was actual intelligence, if only we were being replaced by Blade Runner-esque sentient androids. I mean, this is just an updated version of, the 19th century robotics that replaced the workers at steel mills and stuff like that. And it's exploitative. This chat GPT, you mentioned that they're going to send no more reporters. Yes, there's going to be reporters. They're going to be financed by news organizations. And then what these AIs do is they just rip off the work of other people and, emulate human language and, steal from artists and steal from real creators. And it's terrible. It needs to be, strictly regulated. These people need to be fined for copyright violations because they're not coming up with this information. They're just stealing. It's just an advanced form of Google, essentially. That's stealing other people's work, other people's programming. Other real creators are creating stuff, putting it on the web, and all this AI, which is not really AI, it's more like machine learning tools. All they do is just steal and collate.
Borzu, thank you. Vladislav Davidson. Clearly, there are issues related to the story that we're covering every day and every moment of the day, Ukraine, where the issue about what is true and what is not could clearly be manipulated by something like AI.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I'm zooming in from Cannes. I'm at the Cannes Film Festival. I'm also producing, and my wife's a producer. I just came from a meeting with a friend, and I was going to ask him to sign a memo deal to work on with me on a picture. And he said I'm actually a member of the Hollywood Writers Union, and I can't sign any deals right now because the Hollywood Writers Union right now is making a last-ditch effort before it's too late to regulate AI out of existence, out of Hollywood. They haven't quite, by they I mean the Hollywood studios have not unleashed the robots into the vaults in order to learn how to write classic Hollywood films. They could in a couple of months or half a year at most. But the smart people in the writers' unions are making a last-ditch effort to stop that. And so there's a writer's strike on now, and I can't make any deals in Cannes because the very smart people have said, okay, we have 6 months in order to fight back before the Terminator and machine Skynet, redistricts us out of existence, right? So it is important that some people are fighting back, and I'm not one of these doomsayers who say that there's nothing we can do. There's still a little bit of time to regulate these things using national and international governments. In Ukraine, it seems to me that there's been enough with the misinformation and disinformation tropes. And before we called them misinformation, we just used to call it plain old propaganda. That's all I want to say. There's been far too much said already about Ukraine and propaganda and misinformation and disinformation. Enough for one evening.
Indeed, indeed. Vladislav, thank you. Vivian, can I come back to you and ask to develop that one in a sense? Because, for instance, across Africa already, and I've been to Botswana a couple of times in recent months, and there is a sense when you get there that they have a narrative they've picked up from Russian sources, which makes them see the world in one particular way, whereas in fact, and then start telling them something that might be completely different, and they're looking at me as if I'm kind of not telling the truth. Now,
You know, in a way, we're back to what I said earlier of looking at the map of Turkey and seeing only the cities, and that's what we listen to and we read and we absorb. And it's very much the same, I think, in the world map. We think the world is, you know, all behind the Ukrainians and so on, and we're looking at it through a very narrow prism. Africa does not feel like it owes the West much at all. Its history with the West has been bad, exploitative, very, very bitter, you know, long buried memories. And you have particularly China, who's invested billions into things which Africans need, infrastructure, you know, aside from, you know, building a football stadium in every single city across Africa. And so in some ways, the non-Western world, and particularly Russia, has seen this huge continent with much of the world's raw materials, and, you know, realized that the West is kind of screwed up. And we're now paying the price for it, I think.
Craig,
Yeah,
will I be replaced by a robot one day, do you think?
I can only hope that Everton is not replaced by robotic football players. For your sake, sir.
If they could win the matches, I'd be quite happy with that one, I think.
We are concerned about your weekend.
Craig, thank you very much for being concerned about my weekend. Let's put AI to bed, and let's talk about one of the stories which I think has touched everybody across the world. That's the passing of the sensational Tina Turner at the age of 83. Tina Turner, of course, becoming famous in the 1960s as part of the Ike and Tina Turner setup. Ike, of course, was then her husband. The hits kept coming, but Ike was a very jealous man who used to beat Tina, so she herself, a star but a victim of domestic violence. She rises up, she divorces her husband, and then goes on to reinvent herself as a solo artist, and the hits keep coming. She is a sensational performer. She has a whole list of hits to her name. We'll have plenty of this coming up, but let's get some thoughts from our guests about Tina Turner and her passing. Vivian, may I start with you?
You know, what's so amazing about Tina Turner is her music makes you feel so good.
Completely.
And yet so much of it was written in the depths of pain. You know, and what's also so amazing is we're talking like 50 years later, we're still like bopping away to her music. We know all the lyrics, and that really kind of defines a musical icon. It's remarkable.
Borzu Daragahi, can I go to you? Over in Istanbul, give us your thoughts on Tina.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a fan. She's a great musician, great singer, great artist, great poise, and you know, she really stood up for herself and became a kind of, you know, a feminist icon in a way. There was a great story about her, you know, basically reading the late broadcaster Mike Wallace, the Riot Act, because he was being very rude to her in an interview, and, you know, basically put him in his place. And it was quite, it's an amazing story of, you know, basically a very strong woman in the music industry taking on a really kind of a macho, abusive guy who was trying to humiliate her for a television interview. Just a very, very strong person and a very great artist, and sad to see her go.
Indeed. Vladislav, Tina Turner, what do you think of?
You know, I mean, I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn. It was on the background of the radio. It was when I was growing up. Obviously, a great musician and a great lady. And this is, of course, a massive loss to the culture.
Indeed, massive loss. Craig?
She was also a political activist, and she made the most radical political statement that any American can do, and you're not going to see it in any of the coverage. She renounced her United States citizenship, which is a very difficult thing to do, a very expensive thing to do, and it's one that you are not celebrated for in the United States. And she did it. And in all the interviews, I've never seen one where anyone asked her why. Because she didn't do it for tax purposes, because it is illegal to renounce your U.S. citizenship for tax purposes. The United States government considers it a political decision. And I always thought that was the most interesting thing about Tina Turner, what prompted her to do that. Plus, she did one of the greatest songs ever done, River Deep, Mountain High.
Great song.
Which she said was her favorite song. But, you know, that's the lingering question. Why did Tina Turner say goodbye to the United States and renounce her citizenship?
We'll leave that question hanging. Craig, thank you very much indeed. Craig Peters of the Daily Beast. Vivian Walt of The Time, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Borzid Argari of The Independent over there in Istanbul, and Vladislav Davidson joining us from the Cannes Film Festival. Tina Turner's passed away. Let's leave you with Tina singing one of her biggest hits, Simply the Best.